Ever feel like the more you try to be good, the more you realize how much you don't know? Well, today we're going deep, like really deep, into a text that's challenged and inspired folks for centuries, talking about Jesus' Sermon on the Mount,
Mm-hmm.
specifically Matthew chapter 5. We've got commentaries, interpretations, the works, all ready to unpack what these teachings actually mean
Right.
and how they might, apply to your life today.
Absolutely. And that's what's so fascinating about this text, right? I mean, it sparked so many different interpretations, even debates,
For sure.
over its true meaning and how we actually live it out.
It's not just some obscure theological footnote. We're talking the Sermon on the Mount here.
Exactly.
This is like big time stuff.
It is. And to understand why it's caused so much discussion, we've got to look at the context, right? So Matthew presents this sermon as the first of 5 major teachings from Jesus.
Okay.
And he's really emphasizing action over just belief here.
So it's less talk, more walk.
Exactly. It's not enough to just talk the talk. You got to walk the walk. But then you actually get into the content of the sermon itself.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, wait a minute, how do I actually do this?
Right. Exactly.
Take the Beatitudes, for instance, those blessings that Jesus outlined. They don't exactly sound like your typical self-help advice, do they?
No, not at all. Blessed are the mournful, the meek. Who are these people, and how do I get their agent?
Right. Well, that's where digging deeper really pays off,
Right.
know? When Jesus says poor in spirit, he doesn't mean an empty wallet. He means recognizing your own spiritual need, that feeling of emptiness,
Mhm.
that only something beyond yourself can fill. Have you ever felt that? That kind of yearning for something more?
Absolutely. I think we all have at some point, yeah.
Right. And to see that recognized as like the starting point for spiritual growth, it's kind of profound when you think about it.
Yeah, it really is. And I'm guessing the other Beatitudes kind of follow a similar pattern.
They do. They absolutely do. They build on each other, revealing this path to being truly blessed that, at first glance, it might not make sense.
Right.
But before we get too deep into the Beatitudes,
Okay.
there's another layer to this sermon that tends to trip people up.
Okay.
Those seeming contradictions.
Oh, yeah, the parts where you're like, wait, did Jesus really just say that?
Exactly.
Like, on the one hand, we're supposed to let our light shine, right?
Yeah.
Don't hide your faith under a bushel.
Right.
But then he tells us not to be all showy and attention-grabbing about our good deeds.
Yeah.
How do you reconcile those two things?
It's a great question, and it's one that people have been wrestling with for centuries. Some scholars, they suggest there's like a 2-level system of interpretation going on.
Okay.
Others emphasize the need for God's grace to bridge the gap between the ideal and our human limitations.
Right.
Some even argue that the entire sermon, it was meant for a specific time and place, like a future millennial kingdom that hasn't arrived yet.
A millennial kingdom? What does that mean?
So in some Christian traditions, the millennial kingdom, it refers to a literal 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth, right? After his second coming.
Yeah.
A time when these teachings could be fully realized. But even if we don't necessarily buy into that specific interpretation, the question still remains.
Yeah.
How do we apply these seemingly impossible ideals
Right.
in our own lives? Like right here, right now.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
It is. And it's one we're going to be exploring more in depth as we unpack specific examples from the text, like how Jesus reinterprets the commandments.
Yes.
Because let's be honest, it's not enough to just not murder someone.
Right.
Jesus takes it way further than that.
He does. He certainly does. And that's where things get really interesting because he challenges us to examine not just our actions,
Right.
but also the thoughts and intentions of our hearts.
Yeah. Speaking of challenging, let's talk about those Beatitudes some more. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Now, I don't know about you, but my initial image of meekness, it's not exactly flattering. It makes me think of like a pushover, someone who's easily taken advantage of.
Yeah, and that's a common misconception, actually.
Yeah.
True meekness, as Jesus is describing it, it isn't weakness at all. It's more like strength under control.
Okay.
A willingness to submit to a higher authority,
Mm-hmm.
not out of fear or even obligation, but out of love and trust.
Okay. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
But how does that actually look in everyday life? Are we just supposed to let people walk all over us?
Not at all. Remember, it's strength under control.
Okay.
So it's about choosing how and when to assert yourself,
Okay.
discerning, when to stand firm and when to yield, not out of weakness, but out of, wisdom and compassion.
So it's more about intentionality in our responses
Right.
rather than just reacting, impulsively.
Exactly, exactly. And that actually ties into another fascinating concept from the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled.
That's a hunger I can get behind.
That's me.
But what does that even mean? To hunger and thirst for righteousness? Is it just about, like, being a good person?
It's much deeper than that.
Okay.
It's an active longing, like a deep desire to align yourself with God's will, to really embody his character in everything you do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not passive. It's not just wishing for it. It's an active pursuit,
Right.
like a relentless hunger that drives you towards spiritual growth and transformation.
Like setting an intention, not just for your actions, but for the core of who you want to be.
Exactly, precisely. And that actually sets the stage for some of those more radical teachings that follow.
Okay.
The ones that really challenge our typical understanding of what it means to live a truly righteous life.
So we're talking about this deep desire to do what God wants, but then Jesus comes in and says, "You've heard it said, but I tell you." It's like he's taking the rules we thought we knew and just completely flipping the script.
It's like he's going beyond just the words on the page,
Yeah.
revealing this whole other level of what it means to be truly righteous, something most people had never even considered.
Yeah, like, you think you know what good is? Let me show you what it really looks like.
Yeah.
And some of the examples he uses are pretty intense, like that whole thing about anger.
Right.
It's not even just about what you do. It's about what's going on inside, in your heart.
Exactly. He's getting to the root of the problem, not just putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms.
Right.
It's not enough to just avoid, punching someone. He's calling us to look at our anger, the resentment, all those feelings that can poison relationships from the inside out.
It's like that saying, isn't it? Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Exactly. And it really highlights how transformative Jesus' teachings can be. He's not just giving us a new set of rules, right? He's offering a path to actually heal from those destructive emotions that can keep us trapped.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But how realistic is that? We all get angry sometimes. It's normal. Are we supposed to pretend we don't feel it?
It's not about denying your emotions. It's about changing them, right? Notice how Jesus, he doesn't just stop at don't be angry. He gives us a way to deal with it in a healthy way.
Okay.
Like he talks about reconciliation, about going directly to the person you're angry with and talking it out.
Instead of letting it turn into bitterness and resentment.
Exactly.
Which, let's be real, we've all been there.
And this whole focus on inner transformation, it's even more obvious when he talks about adultery.
Oh, yeah, that one definitely got people's attention. It's not just about the physical act anymore. He's talking about your thoughts, your desires.
Exactly. He's challenging the way people thought back then, which was mostly focused on outward behavior, not what was going on in your heart.
Right.
He's saying lust, even if it never goes beyond just a thought, it's still betraying the other person.
It's about guarding your heart, your mind, being aware of what you let yourself dwell on. But is that even possible? We're human. We have these desires.
And that's where grace comes in. Remember, we were talking about hungering and thirsting for righteousness.
Yeah.
That means desiring purity, wanting to be whole in your thoughts and desires.
Right.
But it's a process. It takes time. You don't just wake up one day and you're there.
So it's not about being perfect. It's about trying,
Yeah.
about always aiming for God's standard, even if you mess up sometimes.
Exactly. And this idea of pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone, that's really key when you look at how Jesus talks about divorce, too.
Okay.
He has a much stricter view than was normal back then.
Yeah.
He emphasizes how sacred and permanent marriage is supposed to be.
It's pretty different from how some people view relationships today, almost like they're disposable, give up as soon as there's a problem.
And it shows just how much value Jesus placed on commitment, on fidelity, on facing challenges head on, instead of taking the easy way out. He's basically saying, marriage should reflect God's love for us, unconditional, enduring, and in the end, transformative.
That's a lot to live up to, but it's also kind of inspiring.
It is.
Imagine if we approached all our relationships with that much commitment and purpose.
Now, that's a radical thought, isn't it? And it leads us to maybe the most challenging part of the whole Sermon on the Mount, of the part about loving your enemies and praying for those who are mean to you.
Yeah, that one always gets me. Turning the other cheek, going the extra mile.
Yeah.
It sounds so passive, so unfair almost.
It definitely goes against our instincts. But remember, Jesus isn't saying you should just let people walk all over you.
Okay.
He's not saying to just accept abuse or injustice. He's offering another way, a different response to the violence and revenge that was so common back then.
Right.
And honestly, it's still pretty common today, too.
That's true.
So it's not about becoming a doormat. It's about responding in a way that breaks the cycle, disarming the situation with love and compassion.
Right. But how do you even do that, especially when you've been really hurt, really wronged by someone?
That's where those Beatitudes come back in. It's about approaching those situations with a sense of humility,
Yeah.
recognizing that we all need grace, we all fall short.
We all mess up.
Exactly. When you can show that same grace to the people who've hurt you, it's like this force, something that can break down even the toughest walls.
Choosing love over fear, over anger.
Exactly. That's real faith in action, a testament to Christ's power working through you.
Yeah.
It's not about pretending that evil or injustice don't exist. It's about refusing to let them control you, to define you. It's about being part of the solution.
Being an agent of change, of healing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that brings us right back to that idea of exceeding the righteousness of the religious leaders at the time, the scribes and Pharisees.
Right.
Because it's not just about following the rules or putting on a show. It's about your heart being changed, becoming more like God in everything you do.
Yeah. It's like what you were saying earlier about intentionality.
Exactly. And that's where you really see the genius of Jesus's teachings in the Sermon on the Mount.
Okay.
He's not giving us a to-do list. He's showing us a path to real, lasting change that starts on the inside and changes everything.
It's amazing how Jesus ties these impossible-seeming actions back to who we are inside.
It really is a different way of looking at things, even today.
It's not about checking things off a list. It's about who you're becoming.
Exactly. It's not about earning your way to God by doing things. It's about letting him change you from the inside out.
And you see that change in those teachings that seems so counterintuitive at first, like turn the other cheek.
Right?
It's not about being walked all over. It's about breaking free from that need for revenge, for getting even.
It's about rising above, living by a different set of rules, ones that can actually make a difference in the world.
Choosing love even when it's hard.
And that's where you see how strong meekness really is. It takes guts to respond with love when everything in you wants to fight back or just run away. It's that strength you get from surrendering to God, even when it doesn't make sense to your human brain.
What we were talking about before, that image of the stallion.
Yes.
Real strength isn't about untamed power. It's about focusing that power, letting something bigger take the reins.
And that something bigger is the love and grace of God. A love that can heal, that can redeem, that can change even the darkest parts of us and the world around us.
It's pretty radical when you think about it.
It is.
This idea that the way to be truly good, to inherit the earth, it starts with admitting our own spiritual emptiness and then letting ourselves be filled with a love that the world sees as foolish.
And yet, that's the gospel message in a nutshell, isn't it?
Right.
God's ways aren't our ways. His thoughts are bigger than our thoughts, and his love, it can overcome anything.
That's something we all need to hear more often.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Sermon on the Mount, the question I'll leave you with is this. How can you take these radical teachings and make them real in your life, starting right now?
Right.
Where is God calling you to hunger for what's right, to go above and beyond what the world expects, to embrace a higher standard of love?
It's a journey, not a destination, right? There will be missteps along the way.
Definitely.
But that's where that hunger comes in, that desire to keep coming back to God, even when it's hard, even when it doesn't make sense.
It's about keeping that connection strong.
And in those tough moments, remember what Jesus promised to those who are willing to walk this path.
Right.
The comfort for those who mourn, the inheritance for the meek, the fulfillment for those who crave righteousness.
It's a powerful invitation to be part of something bigger than ourselves, to tap into a power that can change not just our own lives, but the world around us.
It really is an incredible thing when you stop and think about it.
Well, folks, we've explored some deep waters today. We've looked at the challenges and, yes, even the contradictions, but also the incredible hope at the heart of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount.
It's a lot to unpack.
We hope this deep dive is giving you some new things to think about. Maybe even inspired you to take a closer look at your own life and how you can live out these teachings in your own way.
Keep searching, keep asking questions, and never lose that hunger for what's right.
And until next time, happy learning.